The Absa Bank in Durban under siege. The ANC Youth League making its presence felt. Occupying the branch in the Durban Central Business District earlier. The move, part of a national drive by the Youth League to force Absa to pay back the money.
What we want as the ANC Youth League is really a very simple issue for Absa. A bank that has operated for years, a bank that has made profits for years, a bank that is a multinational. We are just asking them to pay back the money which they loaned. They've loaned more than 2 billion now, which really could help in the development of this country. More importantly to us as the youth, that this money can be used to fund free education in our country.
The anger and outrage coming in the wake of a leaked public protector report recommending the bank repay the apartheid-era bailout sum. As per the report, Absa is allegedly liable to pay a whopping 2.2 billion rands to the government.
The ANC Youth League has noted the criminality in the financial sector. The ANC Youth League believes that there was criminality and fraud in the transaction that involved Bank Op, which was ultimately bought by Absa, and the Reserve Bank played a role. The criminality must never go unpunished because it is what feeds white monopoly capital. We call on the public protector to speedily issue the report with remedial actions which are binding as per the Constitutional Court judgment, and we are confident that Absa will be held accountable as there are other reports that have been issued before.
The media reports on the leaked public protector report that Absa is implicated in a multi-billion rand claim by the Reserve Bank and calls for the full mighty of the law to be seen to be done, including Absa having to pay back all the billions, including interest stolen fraudulently, as per the CX report.
For those still wondering what the hullabaloo is about, here's why Absa Bank is suddenly in the eye of a storm. Under the scanner is the 2.2 billion rands lifeboat handed by the South African Reserve Bank, first to Bancorp in 1985, then again to Absa between 1992 and 1995, arguably at the expense of black South Africans. Absa acquired Bancorp and all its liabilities in 1992. The report cites Bancorp receiving the lifeboat at a 1% interest rate per annum, while it invested the amount in government bonds with a yield of 16%. The difference, that is 15% interest amounting to the lifeboat. The outrage today is the result of what started in 2012 when Cape Town-based activist Paul Hoffman convinced former public protector Thuli Madonsela to investigate the alleged failure of the government to recover the funds borrowed by Bancorp, which is now Absa, from the apartheid regime. Madonsela interviewed the affected parties for 4 years but had not finalized the report when she left office. The new public protector advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane took over and finalized the draft report, which was subsequently leaked.
I was under the look. Me and Thuli worked closely from 2011. We were in communication telephonically, we corresponded through email. I gave Thuli Madonsela a lot of information. I actually guided her along the investigation, thinking that she was investigating the bonds. She also made me believe that she was investigating the bonds. And the fact that it stretched from 2011 to now and nothing, I had an understanding because I knew how complicated it was. only to find out that the last week before she leaves that no, but she had washed down the whole investigation and narrowed it to the lifeboat, and yet take 5 years, and yet go on public media and say, I just received the report, I didn't even have a chance to sign it off. Now that is so bizarre to me. And the fact that she is saying before she left, she couldn't even sign the thing. That goes, my concern is that state capture thing, why did she give that as priority? Yet this matter has potential to bring billions of rand, hundreds of billions back to the country. She's had this matter since 2011. Why didn't she make this matter a priority? And the question that I would also like to know is that Pravin Gordhan, as the Minister of Finance, knowing we need of revenue in this country, why didn't he give the 1.5 million to Thuli Madonsela to finish the CIX report? Because Thuli has been citing that it's a lack of funds, lack of resources. And suddenly, Pravin was able to just, out of the blue, come up with 1.5 million to do the state capture report.
Absa bought, see, Absa was not there at the time, but it bought this Bangkok, which it directly benefited from the lifeboats. And not only that, the deal, as we understand it, when Absa bought this property, was that the Reserve Bank will continue to provide us the assistance that it had provided, which is under question. Something that we don't talk about a lot is Bangkok and other wide businesses, including Rembrandt and so on. Bangkok in particular, it says each time it had financial problems. In other words, it lends money to white people. White people don't pay Bangkok, it just goes to the Reserve Bank.
Private investigator Jeff Kurbanali explains what he calls the Reserve Bank's illegal gift to Absa.
What is even more interesting is the fact that after the Reserve Bank gave Absa this gift, in addition to it, they then suggested that Absa needed to invest the same money that was given to them into government bonds, whereby government was going to give them a return of 16%. That is the most bizarre thing I have ever come across. It's like a bank giving me a personal loan and saying, okay, we give you a loan, we grant you a loan for 100 million, but keep it with the bank. We will then pay you a 16% in return, while we're charging you a 1%. Now, that is so strange and so bizarre. That's one of the reasons why, after reading and studying that report, I concluded this was part of the corruption. It was actually intended to reward Absa for all their involvement in the illicit financial outflow that was being done out of this country to this very same Absa Bank. The report is saying this was a gift, and there is proof to that, because if it was a lifeboat, first of all, there was no, at the time, there was really no need for Absa to be given a lifeboat. And if there was a need, Absa had shareholders like Remgro, had shareholders like Sandam, who were quite capable to rescue the bank. So it was not at that stage necessary at all for the Reserve Bank to have granted a lifeboat. A lifeboat is given to a bank that is unable to rescue itself. So this was basically a gift of a brotherhood of the Broederbond, which is the Sanlam and Remgro. and it was a reward for whatever illicit involvement that they were involved with.
The Public Protector's leaked report, relying quite heavily on the CX report, going so far as to suggest that the President should consider a commission of inquiry to investigate the alleged apartheid corruption.
It is clear that the apartheid regime fraudulently took money from the government, and there are people who benefited from that, like Absa. So we are saying Absa must pay back the money. But what also we are saying as MKM is that after 20 years of our democracy, our government did not do an audit of what do we have in the country and what was stolen. And we think if we can do that by establishing a judicial commission of inquiry, we'll be able to address some of the challenges that are faced by our government now in addressing inequalities, unemployment, and poverty.
Absa is just one of the companies or conglomerates or international organizations that owes and have looted from the South African government over years. Whether it was prior to 1994, elevated to post-1994, it's immaterial. The fact is the country has been robbed of money.
Expectedly, Absa has found the Public Protector's report regrettable and with alleged factual and legal inaccuracies. But those wanting to correct injustices of the past have smelt blood and are unwilling to let Absa get off so easily.
I find it quite interesting that Absa has been aware for a 6-year period that a report is being, an investigation is being undertaken by the Public Protector, and they haven't taken the time to actually furnish her with the right information. So it's quite interesting for them to come back 6 years down the line and say that, oh, there's some additional documentation that the Public Protector hasn't seen. So the question is, why did they never provide it in the first place? Absa seems to be operating in a very interesting economic vacuum where they simply feel free to ignore all the events that led up to them being formed, and they simply want us to believe that nothing untoward happened.
Some even arguing that the Public Protector's estimate of over 2 billion rands to be paid back by Absa is grossly undervaluing the transaction.
The Public Protector has made an estimate of around 2 billion rand as the amount that needs to be paid. That number grossly undervalues what this transaction is. Let us go back to the 1992 transaction and then say you bought all these banks for a particular fee. If this bank op transaction had not been part of it, how much would you have paid? And then the difference between what they would have paid for all the other assets and what they paid for this particular tainted asset is essentially the part of Absa that belongs to the state. So then you might find that if it turns out that if Bancorp made up 10% of Absa's value, it means that 10% of Absa's market capitalization actually belongs to South Africans, and that is what they need to be paying back. The CEO of Absa has been adamant to say is that when they acquired the assets of Bancorp, they did so at market prices. Now, obviously, that is absolute rubbish because essentially that asset that they acquired had been manufactured through stolen funds. So it doesn't make sense for her to then say there was nothing wrong with that particular transaction. So I do think that it will probably be in Absa's interest to then facilitate a process of repayment sooner rather than later. Now, whether they then decide to go and recover that money from Sanlam is between them and Sanlam. But I don't think it's in their interest to drag this out because they cannot dispute that something has to be paid back.
Even the then Reserve Bank Governor, Chris Stolz, has alleged that the claims attributed to him in the report are wrong. The Public Protector's report attributes evidence by Stolz to suggest that the South African Reserve Bank had an agreement with Absa to repay both capital amount and interest. Stolz has denied any such agreement with Absa. The leaked report further says that Absa failed to pay the interest and only repaid the capital amount, to which Stolz has said that the Bancorp loan was without interest. Reports claim that Dr. Chris Stolz placed responsibility at Absa's door for repaying the Bancorp bailout. The former South African Reserve Bank governor, however, denies it, saying he made it clear that there was no way the bank can claim anything from Absa. However, private investigator Jeff Mkhwebane, who was also involved in the Absa investigations, slams the role played by the former governor.
Crystals, I'm going to describe Crystal as one of the most intelligent person in the financial industry and also one of the most corrupt person in the financial industry. Judge Nell described him correctly. He said his involvement in the business community should be totally eradicated. That's the way I would describe. He is a lying person, he's a manipulator. He just seems to find his way because of the certain position that he held in this country as a reserve bank. He thinks whatever he says, people must believe. I don't believe anything Crystal says.
One of South Africa's richest men, Johan Rupert, is also in the line of fire. According to the CX investigation, which forms the basis of the Public Protector's report, Rupert and his father helped organize the Absa lifeboat. Black First, Land First accuses the Ruperts of benefiting from the Absa lifeboat through their holding in Rembrandt, which today is Remgro.
Johan Rupert and his father, Anton, the late Anton Rupert, are implicated and named in the CIX report as beneficiaries of these so-called, the bailouts, but they were called lifeboats. So why is he now commenting when we're talking about Absa? And he is mixing up things to create confusion. And if you look at all of his statements, you see that there is a thinly veiled threats that people will apologize, he wants investigation. But this matter is now 20 years old, and he's been in the public eye for all this time. He says it's a fiction. He says the CIX report is a fiction. Well, we say, why didn't you fix the fiction for 20 years? Johan Rupert is not a poor guy, he's a billionaire. And if the report implicates him in this way, he should have long corrected this matter. Our view is that Johan Rupert wants to intimidate the public protector. He wants to intimidate those of us who've been calling for accounting by white capital. And also, he knows, because of his wealth and his control of the media, that he can push a counter-narrative, a narrative that says that, in fact, nothing wrong had happened.
Mkhwebane also accused the Ruperts of benefiting from the lifeboat and makes an emotional appeal for the money to be paid back.
This corruption is holding this country. At ransom. This corruption has a potential to take South Africa down if it is not resolved. So I'll say this to Johan Rupert. Please, for the sake of our children, for the sake of this country, pay back the billions that you owe us. Save this country from a disaster, because if we do not resolve this issue, this corruption, which is a claim, which is currently sitting as a claim on our government.
Like all controversies, the Absa lifeboat scandal quickly sparked a political fallout. Some quick to jump on the bandwagon, flogging the apartheid-era injustices, while others overtly conspicuous by their silence. EFF boss Julius Malema specifically coming under fire first for his silence on the scandal, and subsequently for refusing to ask Absa to pay back the money when he did break his silence. When asked by journalists to comment on the issue, Malema rejected the campaign that Absa must pay back the money. He instead accused the Guptas of running the political campaign and said that EFF will deal with Absa in its own time. This was the same Malema who in late 2015 had promised to occupy Absa for stealing the money in the apartheid era.
It's very painful that the EFF, which people thought it is their last hope after the ANC has failed them, it has now become the protector of the same people who has oppressed them for so many years.
The former EFF member accuses Malema of selling out to white monopoly capital, a sentiment echoed by more than a few.
After the public protector said Absa has benefited in the lifeboat during apartheid and that it has to pay 2.3 billion, you become surprised why all of a sudden Julius and the EFF is so silent. And then that raises a question. It makes you to wonder what went on behind the scenes there in London.
It was Julius himself who said in 2015 that he will occupy Absa. And then today he says, yeah, we are the first to say that. And then he says, anyway, anybody who calls for the occupation of Absa is joining a call for the Guptas. So this doesn't make logical sense. The narrative created by the white-owned media, including opposition parties, want regime change to maintain the white status quo, is to create the Guptas as a bogey of some kind of, this is the problem. And Zuma is the problem in South Africa. It is not white capital, it's not land thieves. When there's a need to confront white capital, they bring in the Guptas, even when they actually don't belong there.
Mr. Malema, since he met with Lord Renwick, who is a 32-degree Freemason in the United Kingdom, when he came back, effectively EFF was no longer the EFF that people knew when it was established. And that assertion is being made on several occasions without any rebuttal or response from Mr. Malema.
But not just Malema. Many also bemoaning the surprising silence by other political parties, civil rights organizations, and even the media.
We cannot address those issues if people, those who looted, don't come up to the fore. People that are trusted in this country, like former President Thabo Mbeki, cannot come and speak openly to say this is how much was looted, or this was the investigation that was run by the public protector. It's only now that we find out that even former president sat under, the public protector, was investigated, the public protector gave him a conference and they had to speak. These are things that would never have come out. But why have our leaders been quiet for so long?
I think we appreciate the report of the public protector and the CX report, because it has opened our eyes that there was a lot of looting during apartheid, which our government, when we came into power, we did not investigate that. So as MKMV, we are calling for a judicial commission of inquiry to dig deep into the fraudulent activities that happened during the apartheid era.
But where EFF failed to act, the ANC Youth League quickly jumped in, demanding that Absa pay back the money, calling for an Absa boycott, urging the government to shift its accounts from Absa to the post office.
We are making a call that the government of South Africa cannot continue to have a business relationship with a bank that had unduly benefited from the public funds. What we are saying is that the public must join us as the ANC Youth League, and also the government must also join us on our clarion call of making Absa to pay back the money, and also the government to withdraw its business relationship with Absa, because they cannot claim to have the interest of the public at heart, whilst on that other side they've benefited unduly from the public coffers.
But even if the government moves its accounts from Absa, its choices remain limited in the absence of a state-owned bank in South Africa. Unlike other countries, even the South African Reserve Bank is owned privately, a fact often bemoaned by experts.
The challenge here, it's not that the state can create a state bank that will focus on development and empowering the majority black people of this country. The problem is, as you have correctly said, there's arrogance from the white monopoly control banks, and they also control the Reserve Bank of the country. We have to be very clear on that one. Secondly is, it's not only about Absa, it's about the government not having a say on control over the commercial banks in the country. Absa is just one of the companies or conglomerates or international organizations that owes and have looted from the South African government over years. Whether it was prior to 1994, elevated to post-1994, it's immaterial. The fact is the country has been robbed of monies, and Absa is just a fraction of the 26 billion. I mean, it is on record that actually under Trevor Manuel, the Republic of South Africa paid a debt of 56 billion towards international debts, which includes the debts of Absa and others. Now, what we should be talking about is for government to be able to establish a development bank or a state-owned bank, they will need funding and capital to start up. The capital is there. The capital is what these organizations like Absa, they are owing to government, and they must pay.
For now, it is status quo with the Public Protector's Absa report sent to relevant stakeholders for their comments on one hand, and the ANC Youth League turning up the heat on Absa on the other. The Youth League in KwaZulu-Natal has in fact put Absa on a 3-week notice to start paying back the 2.25 billion rand bailout it received. The jury is still out on how the Absa bailout scandal will play out in the weeks and months to come. One thing is for sure, this one is indeed political dynamite, and all parties will use it as ammunition as it suits them in the days to come.